The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. How are you? My name is Luc Urjevec. I'm Vice President of Atlantic Canada for Restaurants Canada, and I'm really pleased to be able to have a chance to speak with you today. A little bit of a town hall meeting on what's been going on with COVID, in particular in Newfoundland and Labrador and across the country. We all know we are living in unprecedented times. Where we have never seen economic conditions like we're seeing today, across the industry. Unfortunately, for many of you in Newfoundland, this was the second major traumatic event you had this year. First with Snowmageddon, and then now this, and so there's no question the industry has been hit hard and devastated by what has happened. Nationally and even globally, we're seeing the world go into a recession, and it's going to take a while for us to get out of this. What I want to do to you today is give you an update on some of our activities at Restaurants Canada and with governments that directly impact your business, and share and take some questions because I know many of you have questions. I'll take questions at the end. You feel free to write them out, and I'll get them read to me, and I will answer them if I can. Or if you have any others, my email address is on the front cover, and feel free to send me an email or give me a call. And if I don't have the answer, I will try to find it for you. At Restaurants Canada, our job is really threefold. We're here to, number one, bring the impacts of this crisis to government. We have to let them know how dramatically this issue has impacted our industry. We do most of the research in Canada on the food service industry. We've surveyed members, and you would have seen some of our press releases and media articles about the plight of the industry. And in Newfoundland, we've laid off 10,000 people since this crisis began, and that's going to impact every single community in the province. Our second job is to, once we've raised your concerns with government, is to work with governments to facilitate programs and policies that can help our industry. And particularly the federal government has been very receptive and have brought out a slew of programs to help the industry, and I hope you're able to avail of them. Quite frankly, your provincial government has been a bit asleep at the switch, when it comes to assisting the industry, or really any industry in Newfoundland and Labrador. And they will readily admit they were late to the dance, but now there's an open line of communication with people in government, and there seems to be some willingness to take some action. Newfoundland and Labrador has a fiscal crisis internally that has really hung them a little bit in terms of how they respond in terms of their fiscal capacity. And we all read the stories in the media about how they're weeks away from being bankrupt. So we're trying to work and ask government to make changes within those constraints. And our third job at Restaurants Canada is to work with governments on plans on how to reopen. We've gone through the major contamination, and we see provinces start to talk about reopening. The curve is starting to flatten and come down, and in many provinces we've seen a dramatic decline in the number of cases, and there are plans to reopen. Saskatchewan, PEI, and New Brunswick have all announced reopening plans. And, Newfoundland will probably not be that far away because you have not had the major outbreaks of some of the other provinces. With reopening, there comes, it won't be like it was last year. The landscape will be different. It will be different. So we're working on things such as risk mitigation. How do we open our businesses with this new reality about contamination of the virus? The need for continued assistance. This doesn't end, this month or next month. Our businesses are dramatically altered for, months to come. And, we're pushing governments to say assistance is going to have to continue. And then last but not least, what can we do to drive, our business? Is there some stimulus that can help us? Are there marketing campaigns, stay-at-home travel campaigns, to get people to go to restaurants? Because the landscape has changed, and we don't want, people to get used to sitting on a couch watching Netflix. We want them back in our restaurants, and we want to come up with strategies to do that. So, starting at a quick look at where the industry has been in the last couple of months, we survey members, and this survey is based on about 13,000 responses from coast to coast, and the numbers for Newfoundland and Labrador were very similar. We asked them, were their same store sales higher or lower than the same period last year? And if we look at the first two weeks of February, people reported already we had a decline in sales. Most of that was based on just the economy, household debt, and the economy slowing down at large. When we probed that a bit more, there was very little fear about coronavirus. Only fear was in some pockets, particularly in, say, Vancouver and the Chinese community and, Metro Toronto, where we saw Chinese restaurants really taking a hit for the New Year's celebrations. When we surveyed in the first 2 weeks of March, that was just before the lights went out. And, 78% of operators reported a decline in sales. And because consumers are scared to go out to restaurants, there are fears of what is this coronavirus. And then moving on to March and April, that's where, it really hit us hard. Restaurants were ordered to close and only work by takeout and delivery. And nearly 100% of restaurants said their same-store sales had dropped. I would like to know the 2% who actually said their business went up, because, I haven't met a single person yet. So, good on them that they were able to make lemonade out of lemons. But, it has been a dramatic impact on our industry. Looking at where the sales have gone, Roberto, you switch, please. The first half of March, sales are down across the industry, about 28%. And the second half, that's where, everything was closed, was down 72% for a total of about 50% for the month of March. If we look into April, we predict it's going to follow that 72% decline. That is an average. We have some restaurants, particularly those that are full-service sit-down restaurants, where they've had 100% decline. And then we have the quick service type that, operate through takeout and drive-throughs, and they're down probably 50 to 60%. But on average, it's somewhere in the range of about 72% that sales have dropped across the industry. Next up. So what are restaurant operators doing? Nearly 50% of them have closed their doors completely, zero revenue, zero sales. We have another 40% that are continuing to operate through drive-throughs. So these are businesses that only own one location. So 40% are doing takeout and delivery, and 8% have already permanently closed. So this survey was taking about the first week of April. So already 2 to 3 weeks into this crisis, 8% had already closed permanently. I think the 50% who have closed temporarily all operations, I think that number is probably going to drop a bit, because as people realize that we're in this for the long run, it's not a short game. Many establishments are looking at how they can reopen with takeout and delivery, because for the foreseeable future, it's going to be our only avenue to serve our customers. Next up, Roberto. I'll take a quick run through of some of the federal programs. I know you'll have questions on many of them. Feel free, as I said, to send them to on the chat bar on the side. I'll answer them if I can, and if I can't, I will get back to you with the question. You know, when the crisis happened, you know, our first avenue was to work with the federal government in terms of supply, ensuring that the food chain continued to exist. We had a role as restaurants, and while we were closed for internal dining, we were an important stream in the supply chain, and we worked closely with the federal government to ensure our restaurants would be allowed to serve takeout and delivery. This was important to serve you know, essential services like truck drivers who are on the road delivering our food and our medical supplies, or, you know, serving first responders or those in self-isolation. You know, there was really a role for us, and we wanted to make sure government recognized that. Secondly, along with this supply, you know, it was about borders, it was about trade. We wanted to make sure we could continue to get our, you know, our products from, you know, across North America to continue to serve our customers. You know, once that was secured, we moved on to, you know, and governments, working closely with governments, you know, what can we do, you know, for our employees? And that's where they came up with SERB, as I think most of you are completely familiar with it. It's a $2,000 benefit that people can receive for up to 4 months for people who lose their income as a result of COVID. It's only available to laid off employees or those who don't have work because their business is impacted. One thing that we wanted to make sure about this was that you could not get it if you quit your job. You are not eligible for SERB, because we wanted to, you know, make sure we could still get employees if we remained open. And the other important piece of this, it is run through the Canadian Revenue Agency. So if there's fraud or if there's overpayment, they are going to catch you at tax time when you file your taxes. You know, another change that we fought for that was quite important to our industry is the ability to earn while you're on SERB. You know, as you know, many of our employees are at or above, slightly above minimum wage. Many of them can earn as much or more sitting at home on SERB as working. So we wanted to make sure they are able to work, even if it's only a few hours in our restaurants, to keep them open. And so the government then put in the ability to earn up to $1,000 a month while collecting SERB. Next up would be the CEBA account. So once government felt they had taken care of the employee side of it and that they could put food on the table and continue to live, you know, it's how can we help businesses? And the CEBA loan, I think most of you are completely familiar with. It's a loan to small businesses to pay operating costs such as rent, utilities, insurance, property tax, or debt. It is 100% funded by the government of Canada. And if you repay the loan before December 31st, 2022, 10,000 of it, or 25%, will be forgivable, and the balance will be converted to a 3-year term loan at 5%. One change that we were able to bring, or two changes that we were able to bring forward to government, and they agreed, was number one, that facilities that sold over 50% of alcohol were eligible for this, because previously under BDC rules, they were not eligible. And secondly, the thresholds between 20 and $1 million were originally, and it was increased to 1.5 million, which helps us. You know, another change as well is where we have someone who may have 2 or 3 businesses under one payroll umbrella. If they're separate and distinct companies, they're able to cut them off as individual businesses and then apply for it individually, you know, if they went over that $1.5 million threshold. You know, that one is pretty straightforward. I think you're able to apply now. Businesses have been applying through their own financial institutions and credit unions, and probably some people have already started to receive the money. Next up will be, will be the EDC loan guarantee for small and medium-sized businesses. There aren't a lot of restaurants that take avail of this program. It's up to $6.25 million for existing clients, and that would be for only a few really, really, really big operations. The next one is a really important issue for us that we've been raising since day one with government, is a need for some sort of rent assistance. Rent is our #1 fixed cost among restaurateurs, rent or mortgage, and in most cases with particularly one-unit operators, it tends to be rent. It's our #1 fixed cost, and if you have zero rent, $0 coming in, it's pretty hard to pay your rent. We were happy that the federal government made this a priority. I got word last week in discussions with the finance minister in Newfoundland and Labrador that they had agreed to this program, and all provinces now have agreed, and this program is now in place. So how this program works is your rent will be lowered by 75% if the landlord agrees for the period of April, May, and June. The government will provide 50% of that, 50% loan to the landlord if they drop your rent by 75%, and you will be required to pay 25%. This program is not open now. It's only expected to be open in mid-May, and there's still many details to be worked out, and we're at the table with the federal government trying to work these out. Eligible tenants have to pay less than $50,000 per month in rent and have temporarily closed or experienced a 70% drop in revenues. So those are two key qualifiers. I will note that one thing, make sure when you're calculating your revenues to make sure if you have VLTs, to put that in the number, because I've had a couple operators who were like in the 60-65% range, and forgot about adding the VLT revenue, and they added that to the equation. They went up about 70%, and it seems they'll now be eligible. A key part of this program is you have to get your landlord to agree to it. And that's where we're working with the federal government, and we're urging the provincial government to get involved in the process. They have to help us put pressure on the landlords. Rent is provincial jurisdiction, not federal jurisdiction. And having the provincial government back the business community could help put pressure on landlords so they agree to lower our rent. Because if the landlord does not agree to lower your rent, it's not going to be any benefit to us. And part of the argument that the federal government uses with the landlords is it's better to get 75% of your rent than 0% of your rent. So we're optimistic landlords will start to play ball. Many of them at this point are, you've probably talked to them and they're not sure. They themselves are waiting for all the details to be ironed out in the next 2 weeks. And, we're continuing to push this issue, and optimistic that most landlords will in the end agree to be part of this program. Other federal programs include the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. This is probably the one that you're all dealing with right now. Applications opened, I think it was this past Monday. And, this program has come a long way from its original concept. When it was first announced, it was 10% subsidy. Since then, it's been expanded to be 75% wage subsidy for businesses that have seen their revenue drop by 30%. For the month of March, you actually only have to show a 15% decline because businesses were closed March 15th. New businesses can also adopt this program by averaging their January and February sales and showing that they had to drop in March. The wage subsidy works in 4-week increments for a total of 12 weeks. The only 12 weeks which you are eligible to receive the wage subsidy goes from March 15th to June 6th. And this is where there's a lot of confusion about this program. So let me just clarify that again. The only weeks you can apply for are between March 15th and June 6th. And you're eligible for a total of 12 weeks of wage subsidy. But this program also has another piece. The program exists from March 15th to October 3rd. So the reason for the difference between the June 6th date and the October 3rd date is twofold. Number one, the government has given themselves the flexibility to expand this program without having to go to Parliament. So if they would have originally just put June 6th, if they wanted to move it to October 3rd, they'd have to go back to Parliament again, and they didn't want to do that. So that is one aspect of it. The second aspect is you can decide in July or August to retroactively apply for the wage subsidy for the period of March 15th to June 6th. So what many operators are, how some operators are thinking is, if I'm only working with no or a skeleton crew right now, I am going to wait until May or June to see if the program is expanded. And if it does expand, I will use my 12 weeks beginning May and go 12 weeks forward. But if for some reason government doesn't extend the program, you're still going to have the ability to go back and claim from March to June 6th. So we're optimistic and we're pushing for this program to be expanded for a number of reasons. Number one, it would not pick up many seasonal operations who don't open till May or June. And secondly, it seems opening and recovery is going to take much longer than we expected. And, many, particularly full service restaurants, were closed in March and April and had zero wages, so there's no subsidy to claim. So we're working hard to try to get this June 6th window expanded and pushed forward. But in the meantime, you're protected if it doesn't get moved to be able to go back retroactively anytime before October 3rd to claim those 12 weeks between March 15th and June 6th. So I know that was, a little convoluted but it's just, I think it was necessary to spend that time. Another important point of this one, and I've had this question a lot, is you cannot receive CERB and the wage subsidy at the same time. So if you have someone in CERB who's working up to that $1,000 limit, they cannot be part of the wage subsidy. So you cannot claim that $1,000 as part of your wage subsidy. The employee can only receive one or the other. And if they receive both, the CERB will be clawed back at tax time. Okay, and the final sort of measures from the federal government, I'll just go through these quickly, would be HST remittances are deferred until June 30th, 2020. What's important about that is those are remittances that are still in your bank account. We are lobbying government actively with the Hotel Association of Canada and the Tourism Association of Canada to allow us to keep that money. So, there's still a chance we'll be able to do this. There's really no way we'll be able to get them to give us money that was rebated last year that we've already remitted to government, but that money that continues to sit in our account, we're continuing to lobby them to allow us to access it. Income tax payments have been deferred until August 31st, and the work sharing program has been extended from 38 to 76 weeks. So now moving along to the provincial programs. As I said earlier, the provincial government in Newfoundland and Labrador, quite bluntly, were not very supportive of the business community. I joined with a number of business associations in Newfoundland and Labrador to push government to get involved, to start discussions with the business community, and they're now starting. So I am hopeful we're going to get results. I am told that there could be some announcements today that will be positive for business. I've been I've had a number of meetings with the finance minister and the labor minister and the business minister and the premier's office, bringing our concerns forward, as well as the opposition leader. And hopefully they're beginning to start to listen, because my intelligence tells me there could be a press conference going on now where there could be some positive announcements. It's a little bit more difficult in Newfoundland and Labrador right now. The minority government makes it difficult because they have to try to get three parties to agree on most things, which, as you know, can be very, very, very difficult when everyone's trying to play politics with it. That being said, we continue to have some success at the provincial level, and we continue to be engaged continually with the provincial government. A few of the things that had happened, we made sure initially that the restaurants and the takeout delivery portion of restaurants were an essential service where we continued to stay open. We were also able, and this one, this one resulted from a member calling me. On Sunday night, Atlantic Lottery shut down the lottery terminals. On Monday morning, I got a call from an operator who said, "Why don't you ask government if we get to keep the wages before they do a sweep on Wednesday?" So, I started at the Department of Finance and got them to agree, and then went to 4 provinces and then the Atlantic Lottery. And by that afternoon, Atlantic Lottery had agreed that we could keep the wagers in our accounts to use as cash flow purposes, and that the repayment would be over time from future commissions. We would not have a bill to say we owe X amount. It's as our commissions come on stream, they'll be clawing it back then. So that was something that happened essentially the very first day. The Workplace Newfoundland premiums were deferred until June 30th. An important part of this is they've also agreed to reassess our payrolls. As you know, they set your premiums based on last year's payroll, and this year's payroll isn't going to look anything like last year's. So they're going to reassess those. Tax filings for the first quarter were deferred until June 1st, and that includes a whole bunch of taxes. But the one impacting most of any of you would be HAPSA. And another important change that they made when they went to the legislature 2 weeks ago was a change of regulations around credit unions, so that credit unions would be able to access the federal CEBA, because some of you may bank with credit unions. So those are the programs that have been announced. I have a bit of a laundry list of programs that I've been pushing for and discussing with government actively over the last number of weeks. I'll just go through some of these quickly and give you an update. One that's very important to us is Employment Standards Act clarity. When this happened, most of you probably paid off your employees or vacation pay and temporarily laid them off. There is a provision in the Act to say you don't have to pay them notice if there are unforeseen circumstances. And for some strange reasons, the government will not come out and say that COVID-19 is an unforeseen circumstance like other provinces have. So you could be at risk of having to pay notice for your employees that you've laid off if government does not say you will not have to. So right now it is very silent on it, but I just want to highlight that this is a risk. If you go to the Employment Standards Division, they'll say the advice to employers is seek legal counsel. That's not good enough for us. I think it's government's role to say, this is in Section 53 of the Act is an unforeseen circumstance, and you are not at risk at having to pay notice for your employees because you laid them off. Another thing we're asking from government is protection from eviction. And this is really important because, this will force landlords to negotiate. Both New Brunswick and Nova Scotia have brought in measures to say a commercial landlord cannot lock you out or evict you. So if you haven't paid your April rent and you haven't paid your May rent, they cannot change your locks, they cannot seize your assets. And we're asking the government in Newfoundland to do the same thing. Another area we've been actively involved in is beverage alcohol, and there's quite a bit of an update on this one. The first one, Newfoundland and Labrador is the only province in Canada to not allow alcohol to be sold with takeout and delivery. And a month ago, I thought we had it. I spoke at length with the Minister of Finance. He assured me it was going to happen. We were going to have alcohol with takeout and delivery, and craft brewers could deliver, and distillers could deliver. And as I talked about the political dynamic, because it needed legislation, unlike most provinces, they had to have all three parties agree. And something happened that day, and they could not get all three parties to agree, and hence government did not move forward with the alcohol with takeout and delivery. I am told that they should be going back to the legislature in the next week or two. And once again, the Minister of Finance has told me when they do go back to the legislature, they will change the legislation. And, we have looked, and, I've had numerous meetings with the Minister of Finance and raised it with the Minister of Justice. Could they put it in the emergency order? Is there a workaround? And they assure me, they've had their lawyers looking at it, that there's no way they can possibly allow us to do this without changing the legislation. And so we have to wait till the House is sitting, which I expect is in another week or two. The second issue I raised with them is the return of NLC product without penalty. As you know, the bars were shut down the day before St. Paddy's Day. I'm sure many of you have bought an awful lot of Irish whiskey or products in hopes of selling it on St. Paddy's Day. And right now that product is sitting, you've paid for it and is sitting gathering dust. I've asked the Newfoundland Liquor Corporation to allow us to return products without penalty. And actually, 2 minutes before this webinar started, I just got a note from them that you will receive a notice today from the Newfoundland Liquor Corporation with a procedure for you to return certain products to the Liquor Corporation. So that will happen, and those of you who want to return products, you'll be able to return products. Another measure we've asked them for is to allow liquor licenses to be extended for a year. Many of you will close in January, you close in March, you're closed in April. Could be May, I don't know. And Newfoundland has some of the most expensive liquor licenses in the country, and we're asking them to extend it. We're also asking them to introduce wholesale price discount. We are going to need this in recovery. Newfoundland is the only province in Atlantic Canada to not have wholesale pricing. NLC affords wholesale pricing to cannabis retailers, affords it to agency store owners for their alcohol sales. We need to be included, and we are once again discussing that with the Liquor Corporation. Moving on to other things we're actively engaged in, we're working with Service Newfoundland. We want all license fees and permit fees extended or waived. We just don't want them deferred. We want you not to have to pay for them. We also want, they have a role in terms of power. The government does, and we want payments deferred or waived without interest and penalty for businesses that are forced to close. If you were forced to close, you shouldn't have to pay these bills. The same would be said with the insurance, with the insurance tax. You need to have insurance on your buildings right now for liability, for fire, for theft, for who knows what. You need to have it. But, government has to cut us a break and not make us pay this insurance tax when we are forced to close. As well as we'd like government to move on, to look at some emergency funding programs for businesses that are either unable to access federal programs or for businesses to adapt, maybe to change your businesses to take out or having to put up plexiglass or having, there are going to be lots of new costs and with little revenue coming in, and government is going to have to introduce more programs. And so these are some of the issues that we are actively involved with government, and we hope to have some good news on some of them sooner rather than later. Moving on, Roberto. Okay, we've been talking a lot about the immediate crisis and the closure and immediate funds to businesses to stay open and to survive. And, you know, the federal program, most of the federal government programs have been put in place. They're being tweaked. People are starting to access them. So governments are starting to turn their heads on how to reopen. And as I said, we've had the province of Saskatchewan, Ontario, PEI, and New Brunswick announce reopening schedules and what they look like. And it's something that we think is very important, and we are engaged with the government. We're talking to public health officials on what role do we play in reopening and what will be required of us for reopening. So, you know, have to be clear, you know, things will not go back to normal. When things start to reopen, it won't be like it was last summer. There are going to be physical distancing requirements, and there are going to be risk reduction measures. We don't know what they look like, but they're going to be there. And when we look at some of our Atlantic neighbors, what they're doing, for your information, I'll tell you some of the things. New Brunswick is looking at opening their restaurants 2 to 4 weeks from now. And, you know, there will be social distancing will be required, masks, cleaning regimes, disinfecting regimes, and they're really going to be restrictive on what activities can take place. Bars, on the other hand, are not expected to open New Brunswick until next December. So I guess that was my first question with the New Brunswick officials is, you know, what is a bar, what is a restaurant? And because there's no such thing as a bar license or just a restaurant license, as you well know, there are so many different licenses, and businesses have multiple licenses or change as the day progresses. So what New Brunswick has agreed to do is to base it on activity. So it's not you're open because you're a bar and closed because you're a bar, or open because you're a restaurant, or because you serve food or you don't serve food. They are basing it strictly on your activity. So I'll give you an example. If you're, I don't know, you're a pub. If you're a pub that's not serving food, and you know you have a band and you want people to come dance and drink and party, that's not going to happen. But if you're that same pub and you want people to come sit down, have some drinks, and listen to someone perform, if you keep proper social distances, that will be allowed. So the activity is going to base the result, not the license. So that is another one of my discussions that I'm just going to be raising with the Newfoundland Liquor Corporation, is the flexibility of licensing. The licensing in Newfoundland and Labrador are very prescriptive, and there's so many different types of licenses. We have to be clear that any reopening plan is going to be based on the objectivity of the activity, not on by what piece of paper is hanging from your wall. And so we want to give as much flexibility to the licensee as possible for what will be allowed. As I said, you know, we are actively engaged with government on reopening plans. I've already had a number of discussions with public health officials. We hope by tomorrow, if not the next day, to provide government with a framework in terms of what we see as requirements for reopening and what government should think about in terms of restaurant reopening. And, you know, I guess I'll give you a couple examples would be, you know, government can't say that every table in a restaurant has to have a bottle of hand sanitizer if we can't buy hand sanitizer in the province. So you have to have, you know, they can't be so prescriptive for things they don't have, or they can't say everyone has to wear an N95 mask and you can't get your hands on an N95 mask. So those are types of things we're talking to them about, or even things based on capacity. We don't want it to be a set number, 10 or 20 or 30 people, because, you know, if it's 50 people, if you're a 30-seat restaurant, 50 is too many, and if you're a 400-seat restaurant, 50 is too few, or strictly a capacity number. We want it to be based on social distancing. If you can change your floor plan and get 60% of the people in there and still keep your social distance, why shouldn't you be allowed to do that? So that's sort of the approach we're using with government. So we're putting this framework together, and we hope to have it to government, as I said, by Thursday or Friday. And as well as that, the second piece will be a reopening guidance for food service operators. So this is a document we are designing for you, the operator, and what we hope it will be, if we can get government's blessing, it'll be your playbook in terms of what you have to think about when you reopen, in terms of employees that are symptomatic, or barriers, or cleaning, or protective equipment, or sanitizers. We've scoured essentially the world for best practices. We've been in touch with our colleagues at the National Restaurant Association in the United States. We've worked with international brands on what's happening in Europe, Australia. We've looked at what other provinces are doing. So we're just, in the final throes of putting this together. It will be available for restaurant operators. It may need tweaks. It may need changes as things progress, because as you all know, this crisis is not static. It changes every day. Conditions change every day, and we have to be flexible and adaptable to this. So it's something we hope to provide to government as soon as Friday, and then it be available to you as you start thinking about how are we going to reopen our restaurants when that happens. As I said earlier, the PEI is looking, or New Brunswick is looking at 2 to 4 weeks to open. PEI has set a hard date of June 12th, and they have some pretty strong restrictions. You can only dine with family members. You have to keep social distancing. You can't use reusable cutlery. There's a whole bunch of very prescriptive measures in place. So we're going to continue to work with government and the industry to try to do what's right to protect our staff, to protect our customers, but at the same time protect your businesses. So sort of wrapping it up, we're going to continue to work with governments in terms of the risk mitigation side. I think continued assistance is a huge part of this equation. It is not going to end, in May. So we have to make sure whatever programs are in place last a lot longer and go well into recovery. We're also working with governments nationally and starting to provincially in terms of marketing. We're not going to have a lot of international tourists this year. We have to come up with innovative ways to get people off their couches and back into restaurants when they're allowed to open. We don't want people to be complacent. We want them back in our establishments. We want them socializing. We want them eating. We want them drinking when the conditions are right. So we're going to work on marketing programs. In the short term, I don't know which of you who are doing takeout have seen CanadaTakeout.com. It's a partnership we're involved in where you can register your restaurant for free. It gets listed on a website. So when someone puts in a postal code looking for takeout, you get your restaurant will show up. We promote takeout days are Wednesday. We have great big kitchen parties on Facebook to promote Wednesday as takeout day, as long as our businesses are still closed. So I'd urge all of you to register your restaurant at CanadaTakeout.com. If you're doing takeout and delivery, it's free marketing, and it's something that we've helped put together to try to get people to come to our restaurants. It's been going now for 2 weeks, and I know between the first week, restaurants reported a substantial increase in business when they started to use that site. So at this point, I'm going to look if there are any questions, and I'll see if I can answer them. It's hard to read and talk at the same time. Okay. So the question I get, one question here is the rent referral, the rent reduction program. Is it on gross rent? Is it net? What does it include taxes? At this point, we still don't know the answer. We're actively engaged with the federal government to try to work out these details. I can assure you that we are going to work and bring forward a position that is to the maximum benefit of the restaurant operator. So, we'll do the math, and we want it to be most beneficial to you. Another question I get quite a bit is on, once again, the wage subsidy and CERB. To be very, very clear again, an employee cannot get CERB and the wage subsidy at the same time. It will be clawed back. The federal government has told us they are putting something on the website, so when an employee goes to access their CERB account, where they can easily report that they have gone back to work, and then provisions will be made to reimburse any money that they shouldn't have received. That is a very common question I get. And I don't know if anyone, if there are no other questions, I've probably talked way too long. This is my second webinar this afternoon, so I've really talked way too much. I can't wait to come back to Newfoundland and Labrador and be able to come to your bar, your restaurant, and have a drink and taste some of your great cuisine. It's a province I love, and I'm proud to represent as part of my job. And feel free to email me. My name's on and address is on the front cover. Call me. As I said, if I don't know the answer, I will find it out. If I do know the answer, I'll tell you. And if you do have any ideas, concerns, I'm happy to bring them forward. Engage with government continuously at the federal, provincial level, and in all 4 Atlantic provinces. And here at Restaurants Canada, we want to continue to serve you, the member, and make sure your best interests are looked after. So with that, I'm going to bid you adieu. I hope that the government of Newfoundland is now making some announcements that I told were tentatively booked for this afternoon. So hopefully there's some good news that comes out today or shortly. So thank you very much, and appreciate your support as Restaurants Canada for supporting this organization over the years. And we'll continue to work out and do our best to work for you day in, day out. Thank you.